What if I told you that believing in soulmates is actually the fastest psychological route to destroying your relationship?
That's a pretty intense thought, right?
It really is. But today, we are just completely tearing down the myth of the fated connection. So think about your own life for a second. Have you ever felt that instant, just inexplicable spark with someone?
Like that gut feeling where the world just sort of falls away.
Yeah, exactly. Where your brain just screams, there it is, that's the one.
Mhm.
Or on the flip side of that, have you ever fast forwarded maybe a year or two into that exact same relationship, the one you were so incredibly certain was meant to be, and suddenly you just feel completely suffocated?
Right, where the person who is supposed to be your ultimate savior now feels like, well, the source of all your anxiety.
Yes. It's such a wild transition.
It is. It's a profound and frankly very common psychological whiplash. And I'd bet the person listening to this right now has almost certainly experienced that whiplash, or at least knows someone who's trapped in it.
Oh, absolutely.
And that is exactly what our mission is today on this deep dive. We are going to deconstruct society's obsession with these special connections,
All of them. Right.
all of them. I'm talking about the myth of the soulmate, the romanticization of twin telepathy, the deeply misunderstood science of instant chemistry, even that cultural narrative that insists casual sex can be a completely, emotionless physical transaction.
Because it's never just a physical transaction, is it?
Never.
The stack of sources we're pulling from today is wild. I mean, we've got clinical psychology, trauma research, behavioral science, and honestly, a little bit of geopolitical history thrown in there for good measure.
Which is fascinating how it all connects.
It really is. We are going to look under the hood of human connection to reveal the hidden emotional needs and the unconscious psychological mechanisms that actually govern how you connect, why you disconnect, and fundamentally why so many of us find ourselves repeating these toxic, agonizing relationship loops.
We really have to start by dismantling the very foundation of how most of us were taught to view love. And that brings us to the groundbreaking research of psychologist Raymond Nee.
Okay. Yeah.
He studied what he calls implicit theories of relationships. So, through extensive clinical observation, he discovered that people generally walk into romance operating under one of two fundamental mindsets.
Destiny beliefs or growth beliefs?
Precisely. Destiny beliefs or growth beliefs.
I was actually reading through Nee's surveys in the source material, and the questions he uses to identify a destiny believer are just so telling.
They really expose the core assumption, don't they?
Yeah. He asked things like, do you believe that early conflicts in a relationship mean you aren't meant to be? And if you answer yes to that, you are operating on a destiny belief.
Right. It's the scientific term for the soulmate myth.
It's this incredibly binary assumption, like a partner is either the one or they are essentially useless to you. Compatibility is viewed as something fixed, static.
It's the belief that compatibility is a pre-existing condition waiting to be discovered, rather than, a dynamic state that you actively build.
Right, like your archaeologist digging for it.
Exactly. A person with high destiny beliefs expects the relationship to be effortless right out of the gate. Their logic is, if it's truly meant to be, it shouldn't be hard.
But clinically speaking, we have to look at the hidden emotional need driving that worldview, right? Like, why do we want a soulmate so badly?
Well, I'd ask you, what do you think it is?
I mean, I imagine it's a massive defense mechanism. If the universe has, pre-selected a perfect match for me, I don't have to do the incredibly terrifying work of vulnerability.
Exactly.
I don't have to compromise. I just have to find the person who effortlessly fits my exact puzzle piece. It's the desire for a savior, isn't it?
It is the ultimate desire for an effortless savior. It allows a person to entirely bypass the messy, painful work of looking at their own flaws.
Because you're perfect for each other.
Right. If the relationship is destined, you don't have to change. You don't have to adapt. But here is the unconscious psychological mechanism that makes this so incredibly destructive. Conflict in any intimate relationship is biologically and socially inevitable.
It's going to happen.
It has to. Two distinct nervous systems living in close proximity will eventually clash over boundaries, finances, or even just what to have for dinner.
And for a destiny believer, that conflict isn't just a disagreement. It's a fundamental threat to the entire premise of the relationship.
It registers in the brain as an existential threat. The destiny believer's internal logic goes like this. Soulmates do not fight. We are fighting. Therefore, we are not compatible. Therefore, you are not my soulmate.
Wow. So it's just over.
Basically, instead of seeing the conflict as a problem to be solved together, the brain misinterprets the conflict as a signal to abort the mission.
Which explains so much of modern dating culture. I mean, if you're listening to this and you've ever been ghosted after 3 seemingly perfect months, Nee's research suggests you were likely dealing with a destiny believer.
Highly likely, yeah.
The second the illusion of effortless perfection shattered, their nervous system just told them to bolt. They don't try to repair, they just terminate, often brutally and abruptly.
And if they don't bolt immediately, they transition into a dynamic that Dr. Judith Orloff beautifully describes in her clinical work on empathy.
Oh, the cellmate concept.
Yes. She calls it the transition from soulmate to cellmate.
That concept blew my mind. She details how, when the honeymoon phase naturally ends and the dopamine and oxytocin high wears off, this highly idealized soulmate rapidly becomes a source of extreme irritation.
Right.
They go from being your savior to your warden.
And why does that happen? It comes down to mirroring. True intimacy acts as a psychological mirror.
Okay, break that down for me.
So, when the superficial infatuation fades, your partner inevitably begins mirroring your own unhealed trauma back to you. Your shadow side, your hidden anxieties, your unresolved emotional triggers, they all rise to the surface in close proximity to another human being.
You can't hide it forever.
You can't. And for someone clinging to a destiny belief, this mirroring is completely intolerable.
Because the person who was supposed to magically save them from their pain is now the very person forcing them to look directly at it.
Exactly. So the partner becomes the cellmate. They feel trapped by the very connection they idealized just a few months prior.
It really feels like destiny beliefs are essentially buying a lottery ticket. You scratch it off, and the moment you see, like, one wrong number, you just rip it up in disgust and buy a new one, hoping the next ticket is the jackpot.
That is a highly accurate way to frame it. And the tragedy is they spend their entire lives ripping up tickets that could have held real value.
Right. Whereas the other mindset, knee-identified growth beliefs, that feels much more like investing in an index fund.
That's a great analogy.
You know the market is going to dip. You expect volatility. But you're riding it out because you understand that the compound interest over time, the shared history, the inside jokes, the navigated crises, that is where the actual tangible value of the relationship is stored.
Let's really expand on that index fund analogy because it highlights the psychological resilience of the growth believer. They don't just tolerate the market dips, they actively learn from them.
They use the data.
Yes, growth-oriented partners treat conflict as critical data, not as a final verdict. When a disagreement happens, their nervous system doesn't immediately go into fight or flight mode.
They don't panic.
Right. They elicit problem-solving discussions. They aren't threatened by the realization that their partner is flawed because their core assumption is that successful relationships are cultivated, not simply discovered.
Their model says good relationships are made, not met.
Beautifully put.
But the paradox here is almost cruel. By desperately believing in a soulmate, you are actively destroying your ability to actually build one.
That's the tragic irony.
By demanding effortless perfection, you guarantee that you will discard every real, flawed human being who could have actually become your lifelong partner through mutual effort.
It is quite literally a self-fulfilling prophecy of loneliness.
I can hear people pushing back on this right now, though.
Oh, for sure.
I know people listening are thinking, okay, maybe the lifelong soulmate thing is a fairy tale, but you cannot deny chemistry. When two people meet and the spark is just there, it's a biological reality. You feel it in your chest. People view chemistry as this rare magical anomaly.
We deeply romanticize the spark, but the behavioral science paints a very different, highly structured picture. We need to look at the interpersonal chemistry model developed by behavioral scientists Harry Ress and Sonja Lyubomirsky.
I love this part of the research.
It's fascinating. They sought to answer the question, what exactly is happening in the room when two people report intense chemistry? And they found that chemistry is not something you magically stumble into.
No.
No. It is actively, systematically manufactured through a highly observable interaction sequence.
Manufactured. That sounds so clinical for something that feels so overwhelming. The sources broke it down into two parts, right? The doing and the feeling. And the doing starts with this concept called perceived partner responsiveness. I was looking into this, and it seems like it's a lot more than just active listening. It's not just nodding while the other person talks.
It's way deeper than that.
It's when person A expresses a vulnerability or a goal, and person B responds in a way that is so precisely tuned to person A's emotional frequency that person A feels fundamentally validated.
It is the ultimate experience of feeling seen, But the mechanics of how that happens are just fascinating. When that validation hits, it triggers a behavioral loop. It creates what Reese and Libersky call behavioral synchrony.
Behavioral synchrony.
You literally start mirroring each other's language. If one person leans in, the other leans in. You subconsciously adjust your speech rhythms to match theirs. Your nonverbal cues align.
Like dance.
Exactly. And neurobiologically, your mirror neurons are firing rapidly, enabling this deep synchronous dance.
So that's the doing. You're in this intense responsive feedback loop. And that behavior is what actually triggers the feeling of chemistry. Because the sources map out a cognitive shift where your brain suddenly starts perceiving a shared identity. You stop feeling like you and me, and you start feeling like we.
That's the turning point.
And then comes the affective shift, the actual rush of attraction, the dopamine hit. So when you're sitting at a bar and you think, wow, we have insane chemistry, what you're actually feeling is the physiological culmination of a very successful behavioral synchrony loop.
And a cognitive projection of shared identity, yes.
Okay, but, and this is but if chemistry is just a behavioral loop, if it's just a sequence of responsiveness, mirroring, and validation, can't someone just read the playbook and fake it?
I was hoping we would get here.
Like, if I know the steps, can't I just manufacture a Stark to manipulate someone?
That is the darkest, most critical question we can ask about this model. And it leads us directly into the psychology of covert narcissism and emotional manipulation.
Which is terrifying.
It is. Now, the genuine physiological resonance of mutual, authentic chemistry is very difficult to fake over a long period. However, manipulative individuals, particularly those with dark triad personality traits, absolutely can and do weaponize the early stages of this loop.
How do they do it mechanically? Because victims of toxic relationships constantly talk about how the beginning of the relationship felt like absolute magic. They felt a chemistry they had never felt before in their lives.
Manipulators achieve this by mimicking perceived partner responsiveness. They use cognitive empathy rather than affective empathy.
Okay, what's the difference there?
Affective empathy is when I genuinely feel your pain. If you're sad, I feel sad. Cognitive empathy is when I intellectually understand your pain, but I don't feel it myself.
Oh, wow.
Which means I can use that understanding strategically. A covert narcissist will study you. They will use accelerated artificial self-disclosure to force intimacy.
Like trauma dumping early on.
Yes, or mirroring your language, your core values, your hopes, and most importantly, your deepest vulnerabilities, right back to you.
They are essentially hacking the victim's mirror neurons.
Precisely. They are artificially generating that behavioral synchrony at breakneck speed. They give you an intensely tailored reflection of your own unfulfilled needs.
And the victim's brain just buys it completely.
It does. Your brain registers this hyper-attentiveness, triggers the cognitive shift of a shared identity, and floods your system with the exact same affective attraction that true chemistry produces.
But it's an illusion. It's artificial synchrony.
Yeah.
The victim feels seen and validated in a way they never have before, but they aren't actually meeting the manipulator's authentic self.
No, they are meeting a highly calibrated performance designed specifically to create rapid, inescapable attachment.
Which reveals a deeply unsettling psychological paradox about chemistry itself. Chemistry is not a constant, stable entity. It waxes and wanes. And most disturbingly, it is not always mutual.
That's the hardest truth for people to accept.
Because one person can be experiencing a profound, deeply felt cognitive shift toward a shared identity, while the person sitting across from them is completely detached, coldly operating a behavioral script to secure narcissistic supply.
It happens every day.
That is terrifying. It really shows how our own fundamental human desire to feel understood can just be weaponized against us. We are so desperate for that spark that we ignore the red flags of how quickly the fire is spreading.
We ignore the context because the feeling is so intoxicating.
But this desperation for fated magical connections doesn't just show up in romantic chemistry. We invent supernatural explanations for natural phenomena all the time. I mean, think about twins.
The myth of twin telepathy is one of the most culturally ingrained examples of fabricated affinity we have.
Oh, society loves it.
Society loves the idea that identical twins share this extrasensory psychic bond where they can read each other's minds, finish each other's sentences, or even feel physical pain when the other is injured miles away.
You see it on social media constantly. Parents will post a video of their toddlers babbling at each other in what sounds like a secret alien language, and the comments are just filled with people claiming it's supernatural.
It's everywhere.
But when you look at the research of leading experts in the psychology of twinhood, like Dr. Nancy Segal, the whole supernatural narrative falls apart completely.
There is zero peer-reviewed scientific evidence for twin telepathy. None.
None.
What is actually happening, however, is a fascinating masterclass in behavioral science and developmental psychology.
So what's actually going on in their brains?
Well, identical twins share an intense, unprecedented environmental proximity from the very moment of conception. They are raised by the same parents, in the same house, subject to the same daily routines, hitting the same developmental milestones simultaneously.
Right.
And crucially, they are running on virtually identical genetic hardware.
Right. If two computers have the exact same hardware and are programmed with the exact same software, you wouldn't call it magic if they produce the same output when you press a button.
Exactly. Because of their intense shared environment and genetics, twins develop an incredibly high degree of empathy and predictability regarding each other's behavior.
So it's pattern recognition.
Yes. Yes, if they finish each other's sentences, it's not because they are psychically transmitting thoughts, it's because their brains process environmental stimuli in nearly identical ways. Spouses who have been happily married for 50 years do the exact same thing, but we just call that knowing someone well.
And regarding that secret language you mentioned, there is actually a clinical term for it, cryptophagia.
Yes.
It sounds incredibly mystical, but the phonetic mechanics of it are entirely explainable and actually represent a mild unconscious developmental delay.
Which a lot of parents are shocked to learn.
I was reading about the mechanics of cryptophagia.
Yeah.
It happens in about 40% of twins.
Yeah.
Because they spend so much exclusive time isolated with each other during that critical neurological window for language acquisition, they essentially form an echo chamber.
A closed loop.
Yeah. If twin A mispronounces the word water as wawa and twin B mimics it, they reinforce the error. They end up learning phonetic substitutions and pre-verbal sounds from each other, rather than learning standard language from the adult models in the room.
It is a localized dialect born out of isolation, not a supernatural code transmitted from the cosmos.
So once again, we take a completely natural, scientifically explainable behavioral phenomenon, intense proximity and shared genetic processing, and we dress it up in magic because the idea of a fated telepathic connection makes us feel like the world is more magical and less lonely.
We want to believe in magic because the alternative feels very cold.
Which leads us perfectly into the darkest, most clinical manifestation of this entire conversation, the New Age concept of twin flames.
The twin flame phenomenon is arguably the most alarming trend in modern relationship psychology today.
Really? The most alarming.
Without a doubt, it is the destiny belief taken to an absolute extreme. The core concept posits that a single soul was split into two physical bodies at the dawn of time, and your ultimate spiritual mission is to find your divine counterpart.
And the narrative always comes with a massive warning label that believers just ignore. The online communities dedicated to twin flames explicitly state that this connection will be intense, highly tumultuous, and marked by a runner and chaser dynamic.
That's the red flag right there.
Right. One partner will constantly flee the relationship and the other must relentlessly pursue them because the pain of the separation is supposedly burning away their spiritual impurities.
It sounds exhausting.
It is exhausting.
And honestly, it sounds like a textbook description of an abusive relationship.
Because from a clinical and trauma-informed perspective, it is a highly toxic dynamic.
Yeah.
What is actually happening in the vast majority of these self-identified twin flame relationships is an unconscious psychological drive that Sigmund Freud originally identified as repetition compulsion. Let's really break down repetition compulsion, because I was reading Freud's notes on this in the sources, and it sounds incredibly grim. It's like our nervous systems can literally become addicted to our own childhood trauma. How does that mechanism actually work?
It starts as a survival mechanism, but it goes awry. If a person grew up in an environment with caregivers who were emotionally unavailable, volatile, abusive, or highly inconsistent, a child's developing nervous system has to adapt to survive.
It has to make sense of the chaos.
Exactly. It becomes wired to equate chaos, anxiety, and the constant threat of abandonment with the concept of love. That becomes their baseline for attachment.
Okay, so then what happens when they grow up?
Fast forward to adulthood. When this individual meets a healthy, stable partner, their nervous system registers it as boring or even suspicious. There is no cortisol spike.
No drama, so it feels wrong.
Right. But when they meet a partner who exhibits the exact same toxic, unavailable traits as their early caregivers, boom.
Their traumatized nervous system lights up like a Christmas tree.
Exactly. The cortisol and adrenaline spike, and the victim misinterprets that physiological panic as butterflies or insane chemistry. It feels like deep, profound recognition. It feels like coming home.
But they're not recognizing a twin soul. They're just recognizing the deeply familiar feeling of their own childhood wounds being reopened.
And this is where the twin flame label becomes so incredibly dangerous. The victim disguises this trauma response as a cosmic, undeniable connection. The label is weaponized to bypass critical thinking.
So they can't be reasoned with.
No, because when their friends tell them, hey, this person is treating you terribly, you need to leave, the victim can say, you don't understand, we are twin flames, the abuse is just part of our spiritual journey.
That's horrifying.
It keeps victims trapped in agonizing, abusive relationship loops, enduring horrific emotional manipulation, while they patiently wait for their abuser, their divine counterpart, to spiritually evolve.
It's a fabricated affinity used to mask the sheer terror of asserting boundaries and facing the pain of abandonment. We invent these massive cosmic myths to mask our own psychological fragility.
We do. We do it to protect ourselves from reality.
And what is so fascinating about this research is that this exact same psychological maneuvering doesn't just happen on an individual level between two lovers. It happens on a global, macro level.
This was a brilliant connection to make.
I want to bring in the geopolitical history source here, because the parallel to Churchill's special relationship between the U.S. and the U.K. completely blew my mind.
It is a perfect macro-level analogy for how human beings invent destiny to mask vulnerability.
So Winston Churchill literally coined the term special relationship in his 1946 Fulton speech. He stood up and painted this grandiose emotional picture of an ancient, fated affinity between the English-speaking peoples. A brotherhood bound by destiny, shared values, and a cosmic mandate to lead the world.
It sounded incredible.
Right. But when you look at the historical data, historians completely deconstruct this. Before World War II, the United States and the United Kingdom were fierce rivals. They literally fought two wars against each other. There was nothing fated or ancient about their bond. Historians refer to Churchill's speech as a fabricated diplomatic stratagem.
And you have to look at the psychological mechanism Churchill was employing on the world stage there. Why did he need to invent the myth of an eternal, fated, special relationship?
Because he was desperate.
He was. Because in 1946, the British Empire was in severe, irreversible decline. They were economically devastated, their empire was fracturing, and they were militarily vulnerable in the face of a rising Soviet threat.
They were terrified of standing alone.
Churchill needed a narrative powerful enough to bind the emerging American superpower to British interests. He couldn't just say, we are weak and we need your money and military. That admits defeat.
It's too vulnerable.
Exactly. So he manufactured a myth of eternal kinship to compensate for his nation's terrifying vulnerability.
It is the exact same architecture. Just as nations invent special relationships to mask decline and secure resources, human beings invent soulmates and twin flames to mask their own psychological fragility.
The pattern is identical.
We use the language of destiny to secure an attachment because we are terrified of standing alone in the world. We want a cosmic guarantee that we will not be abandoned.
The macro reflects the micro. The hidden emotional need is always security, whether it's a vulnerable nation or a vulnerable human heart.
Wow. Okay, so we have thoroughly torn down the romanticization of the ultimate lifelong fated connection. I want to pivot to the exact opposite end of the spectrum now.
The fleeting connections.
The ultimate fleeting connection. Casual sex, one-night stands. The cultural narrative surrounding hookup culture is incredibly rigid today. We are told constantly that casual sex is a purely physical transaction. It's emotionless, it's empowering because it means absolutely nothing.
And clinical psychology, particularly the deeply insightful data collected by Professor Sam Vaknin, completely and utterly shatters that cultural narrative.
Really shatters it.
The hidden clinical truth about casual sex is that it is never meaningless. Never.
Never. I can hear listeners screaming at their phones right now. People swear up and down, I've had one-night stands, it meant nothing, they were just a warm body, I didn't feel a thing.
People rationalize. Human beings are incredibly adept at constructing narratives to resolve cognitive dissonance. But the clinical data is stark. 100% of participants in one-night stands and casual sex report emotional reactivity afterward. 100%.
That's a huge number. What does that emotional reactivity actually look like in the data?
It spans a wide spectrum, but it is always intense. Many report profound guilt, shame, a sense of emptiness, anger, or a severe drop in self-worth the next morning.
And what about the ones who don't feel bad?
Well, others, particularly those with certain personality disorders, covert narcissism or dark triad traits, they report a massive surge of grandiose pride. a feeling of conquest, and an elevated, albeit highly fragile self-esteem.
They use the partner purely for narcissistic supply.
Yes. But the core clinical takeaway is this. The fact that there is an emotional cascade, whether it's a negative crash or a narcissistic high, is absolute proof positive that the event was psychologically significant. You do not react emotionally to an event that is truly meaningless to your nervous system.
So what is the actual unconscious mechanism happening in the brain during a one-night stand? Let's say it's just a brief 20-minute encounter with a stranger. What is the body actually doing?
The human brain, at an evolutionary level, does not know the difference between a 20-minute casual encounter and the beginning of a lifelong pair bond.
It can't tell the difference.
No, it can't. During any sexual act, the brain is deeply immersed. It floods the system with a potent cocktail of hormones, primarily oxytocin and vasopressin. These are the bonding hormones.
Right.
They actually suppress the amygdala, the brain's fear and threat detection center, to allow you to be vulnerable with this person. This chemical flood creates an immediate, unconscious physiological expectation of continued attachment.
Wow.
Your nervous system is literally preparing to bond, to nest, to build a future with this body.
And then the alarm goes off, they put their clothes on, call an Uber, and walk out the door.
Exactly. When the partner suddenly leaves and the discontinuity of the casual encounter sets in, it causes a severe psychological and physiological rupture.
A rupture.
The nervous system, which was just primed for long-term attachment, experiences that departure as an abandonment. This is why so many people feel that hollow, agonizing malaise, that unexplainable sadness the next morning. Their body is going through acute oxytocin withdrawal.
It's like taking a free sample at a grocery store, tasting it for 5 seconds, only to realize your nervous system just secretly signed a 10-year physiological contract that you now have to forcibly, painfully break.
That is a brilliant analogy. The terms and conditions are hidden in the neurochemistry, and it explains the hidden need driving the behavior.
If the aftermath is so often a physiological rupture, why do people engage in hookup culture so frequently?
They use it to regulate their sense of self-worth. It is a highly vulnerable, deeply intimate act disguised as a casual, throwaway transaction. But to actually engage in it, individuals have to bypass severe cognitive dissonance.
They have to trick themselves.
Right. They are breaking social mores, ignoring their own threat detection systems, and stepping into the unknown with a total stranger.
Which perfectly explains the role of alcohol in all of this.
Yes, Vaknin points out a glaring behavioral tell. People frequently rely on alcohol or drugs to literally alter their mind before engaging in casual sex.
Because if it was easy, you wouldn't need to drink.
Exactly. If it were truly a natural, meaningless, casual act, you wouldn't need to chemically drug your own brain to go through with it. You intoxicate yourself specifically to suppress the brain's natural threat detection and attachment systems, allowing you to endure an act that your sober nervous system would flag as highly risky.
This data perfectly explains a massive, glaring contradiction in long-term relationships regarding infidelity. Well, if a partner cheats and has a one-night stand, their defense mechanism is almost universally, it meant nothing, it was just sex. But to the betrayed victim, it is the ultimate soul-crushing betrayal. It is a complete deal-breaker.
That's very true.
If the cultural narrative were true, if casual sex truly meant nothing, the betrayed partner wouldn't care. They'd just brush it off. But intuitively, at a visceral level, the betrayed partner knows the truth. They know that a one-night stand contains intense, albeit fleeting, intimacy.
The behavior of the betrayed partner proves the clinical reality. The attempt to strip human sexuality of its psychological weight is a modern cultural delusion. Every sexual encounter, no matter how brief, is at its core an embryonic relationship. It demands psychological processing.
Okay, so we've looked at the fleeting connections and the toxic loops of destiny. Let's look at what happens when you actually commit long-term.
Let's do it.
Let's say you've abandoned the soulmate myth, you've cultivated a real connection through behavioral synchrony, and you're married. You should be safe, right? You've reached the promised land.
You think so?
But the research from sociologist Eli Finkel on the suffocation model of marriage in America paints a really concerning picture. His data shows that marital satisfaction and personal well-being within marriage are, on average, dropping significantly.
Yes.
Why is that happening if we have more freedom to choose our partners than ever before?
It is happening because of a phenomenon Finkel calls climbing Mount Maslow. To understand this, we have to look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Okay. The pyramid.
Right. It's usually depicted as a pyramid. At the very bottom, you have your basic physiological and safety needs, food, shelter, security. As you move up, you hit love and belonging. And at the very peak, the summit of the pyramid, you have self-esteem and self-actualization, the need to fulfill your unique potential.
And Finkel reimagines that pyramid as a literal mountain that the institution of marriage has been climbing over the centuries.
Exactly. Historically, the entire purpose of marriage was stationed firmly at base camp. In the agricultural era of the 1800s, you married for physiological survival and economic safety. It was a pragmatic partnership.
You needed someone to help you run the farm, chop the wood, and survive the winter.
Romance was a luxury they couldn't afford. You just hoped you didn't hate each other.
Right.
Then, as society modernized, industrialized, and basic survival became more secure, the institution of marriage moved up the mountain. In the mid-20th century, we entered the era of the companionate marriage. We married for love, belonging, and social respectability.
Which seems reasonable.
It is. But today, in our highly individualized, self-expressive, modern era, we have dragged the institution of marriage all the way to the freezing summit of Mount Maslow. We now ask our marriages to fulfill our highest, most complex psychological needs: self-esteem and self-actualization.
We want our spouses to be our absolute best friend, our passionate lover, our flawless co-parent, our financial equal. And on top of all that, we expect them to be our spiritual guide. We expect them to help us find ourselves and actualize our core identity.
It's an insane amount of pressure to put on one human being.
It really is.
And herein lies the psychological paradox. This is the squeeze that creates the suffocation model. Fulfilling those high-altitude self-actualization needs requires a massive amount of psychological oxygen.
What do you mean by psychological oxygen?
It requires deep, continuous emotional connection, profound mutual insight, and immense, uninterrupted investments of time and energy to help another person self-actualize.
And the air is incredibly thin at the top of that mountain.
It is practically non-existent, because while we are demanding more psychological depth from our partners than ever before, the data shows that couples today are investing significantly less time in each other than in previous decades.
Because we're so busy.
Yes. Finkel's data reveals that between 1975 and 2003, the time childless couples spent alone together dropped from 35 hours a week to just 26 hours. And for couples with children, it plummeted from 13 hours to just 9 hours a week.
Think about that. 9 hours a week. We are asking our relationships to carry the heaviest psychological load in human history, to be the sole engine of our self-actualization, while simultaneously starving those exact relationships at the time, bandwidth, and oxygen required to do that heavy lifting.
We are suffocating the marriage. We demand the view from the summit without providing the oxygen tanks required to survive the climb.
So what happens to the couples up there?
When the marriage inevitably fails to deliver this impossible continuous standard of self-actualization, people become profoundly dissatisfied. They assume they married the wrong person. The victim impact here is a pervasive, tragic sense of loneliness and failure within the marriage. It often leads to toxic enmeshment, where you blame your partner for your own lack of personal fulfillment.
But Finkel isn't anti-marriage. He's not saying we should go back to the 1800s and just marry for a good harvest. What is the deeper lesson here? How do we actually survive Mount Maslow?
The deeper lesson is actually incredibly hopeful. Finkel notes that the marriages that do successfully provide enough oxygen at the summit, the couples who actively carve out the massive time and energy required to meet those high-altitude needs, are happier, more vibrant, and more fulfilled than any marriages in recorded human history.
So the peak is real.
The peak is very real. But for the vast majority of us who are stretched thin by the demands of modern life, the clinical solution is radical: defreighting.
Defreighting, taking the heavy cargo off the relationship.
Yes. Intentionally, consciously asking less of your marriage. Specifically during high-stress periods, like when you are raising young children, building a demanding career, or caring for aging parents, you must let the relationship breathe.
You can't expect them to do it all.
You have to stop expecting your partner to be the sole source of your self-esteem, your entertainment, and your personal growth.
You have to diversify your emotional portfolio. Outsource some of those high-altitude needs. Go to therapy. Reconnect with deep friendships. Invest in your own hobbies and your own internal solitary work.
By lowering the altitude of your expectations temporarily, you stop the suffocation. You give the marriage the grace to just be a source of comfort and safety for a while, which, ironically, strengthens the bond immensely.
Wow. So what does this all mean for us if we synthesize everything we've unpacked today on this deep dive?
We've covered a lot of ground.
We really have. We've journeyed from the toxic myth of the fated soulmate to the artificial synchrony of weaponized chemistry. We've dismantled the supernatural illusions of twin telepathy and twin flames, exposing the repetition compulsion beneath them. We've faced the harsh clinical reality that casual sex is never without an emotional cost. And we've stared down the impossible expectations we place on modern marriage.
It's a lot to process.
It is. But I think the main takeaway is that real connection, it turns out, is not about magical destiny. It is not about finding someone who reads your mind, or chasing the addictive cortisol spike of a trauma bond disguised as chemistry, or demanding your partner instantly actualize your core self. Real connection is about behavioral responsiveness.
Yeah.
It is about choosing a growth mindset. It is about doing the unglamorous, consistent, deeply vulnerable psychological work required to build and maintain a bond over time.
It is fundamentally about stewardship. And I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought that pulls all of these psychological threads together. But to do it, we're going to draw from an entirely different field: human rights and indigenous law.
Okay, I love this connection.
In recent legal scholarship, particularly the extensive work of Eric Dannenmeyer, there is an exploration of an emerging legal concept called the distinctive connection doctrine.
It's amazing how indigenous law perfectly encapsulates romantic psychology.
It is a profound, beautiful parallel. The distinctive connection doctrine is used to legally recognize indigenous property rights. But crucially, under this doctrine, those rights are not validated by a piece of paper, a sudden discovery of the land, or a flag planted in the ground by a conqueror.
Right, it's not instant.
No, their legal, unbreakable right to the land is recognized based on a distinctive historical, cultural, and spiritual relationship forged with that specific environment over centuries of continuous intentional stewardship and survival.
Over centuries.
It is a connection built on generation after generation of adapting to the landscape, weathering horrific storms, nurturing the soil, and choosing to stay.
A bond forged through relentless effort, resilience, and time. Not a magical instant claim, not a destiny belief.
Exactly. So the provocative question we have to ask ourselves as we navigate our own lives is this: if even our rigid, highly bureaucratic, logical legal systems are beginning to understand that the most profound, legally unbreakable connections are built through long-term, deep, intentional stewardship, why do we still expect our own interpersonal connections to just fall out of the sky, fully formed without any work at all?
That is something to seriously mull over the next time you find yourself wishing for a fairy tale. We spend so much of our lives desperately looking for the spark, we completely forget that we are the ones who have to build the fire. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. I hope you walk away today looking at your own relationships not as pre-written destinies waiting to be discovered, but as living, breathing landscapes waiting to be cultivated.